Hello, Mr. Kevin, and welcome to this presentation. Let me introduce myself firstly. My name is Christian Zapata. I am an exchange student from University Hradec Kralove, and today I want to tell you a short story. So, make yourself comfortable because here I want to tell you a story about music, about politics, and about violence. So, let's begin. The story I want to tell you today it's about my country, Colombia, and specifically about my city, Medellin. Medellin is the second biggest city in Colombia and is the capital of the region called Antioquia. Medellin is a very beautiful city with spectacular weather, but has a little problem with violence. I decided to name this presentation in some way or another one can protect oneself from the violence by singing punk. Mimesis in the Medellin's punk because it is a parody of a famous title of Michael Tausig's book called Mimesis and Authority, a particular story of senses that reflect on the problem of mimesis in elder cultures. The original title of Michael Tausig is In Some Way or Another, One Can Protect from the Spirit by Portraying the Spirits. This book has two main ideas. The first one is about mimetic faculty. The mimetic faculty is the faculty that we human beings have to imitate what we see in front of our eyes. And the second topic is about how the ancient culture used to use the mimetic faculty to represent artistically the enemies they saw and to capture their power in this form of portraying them. So, what I was trying to say here is that Medellin's young people use punk music to represent the violent as an enemy and portraying them through their musical composition and gain the power that violence have. To make my point, I want to split my presentations into parts. The first part is about music, about how punk music born in United Kingdom as a reaction of young people against the situation that affect they. And then I want to talk about the way Medellin's young people appropriate the influence of punk music of United Kingdom as a way to fight against violence, not with more violence, but with music. Well, let's start with punk. Punk is a musical genre derived from rock music that was born in the United Kingdom in the 70s. Punk emerged in the suburb of the City of London as a mechanism for social relief and for the search for freedom for a certain part of the youth of the city. All this began with the working class. They felt oppressed by the lack of government support for the youth and the hopelessness of finding a place in society. These young people then began to produce music that required little technique in the use of musical instruments and that contained lyrics with a strong component of social criticism. Then, among all the Colombian cities, punk was more easily adopted in Medellin for two reasons. The first is because Medellin has a great rock tradition that had settled in the city in the 1970s. And the second reason is because in the popular sectors felt that the punk lyrics represent the history of their lives and their daily life situations. But here I need to make a stop because the role of punk in Medellin is not understood without understanding the Colombian context of this time. First, there was a problem of drugs. Drug traffic was a prosperous industry for several years thanks to the exportations to countries such as United States. But in this time, they make a big jump. They achieved to become a criminal industry through better internal organization at the intentions of the leaders of the cartel to join the country's political lives. This makes that the poorest sectors of the city see the neighborhoods conquered by the military force of the cartels and their young people incorporated into the services of the mafias. On the other hand, there is the problem of the guerrillas. Since middle of the century, these armed forces led the country into an internal armed conflict, which generated that the military forces were more aggressive and the more remote towns were scenes for a violent confrontation between the parties in conflict. During all this time, various attempts were made to achieve a negotiated solution to the conflict, but the failure of each peace process led to the renewal of violence and the loss of faith by general population. Finally, there is a third element to take into account here, because this time of the history of my country it was very dangerous. The third element is the emergency of paramilitary groups. These groups, mostly financed by the state, were used as a shock strategy to threaten the dominance of the guerrillas in various areas of the country. But the lack of clear guidelines for its operation and its character outside the law led to the execution of several massacres on the civilian population that was not directly involved in the conflict. Then we can go back to Medellin. Medellin, as the headquarters of the Medellin cartel, led by Pablo Escobar, was one of the greatest epicenter of this wave of violence and perhaps the most affected population for this situation were the young people, since first the state did not support them, second the criminal gangs wanted to recruit them, and third, if they resist, they can end dead very easily. Then, the slogan of this generation was always "no future", because there wasn't much opportunity for them. Therefore, punk served as a defensive mechanism, as a way to resist the wave of violence that hit the city and as an alternative to the violent options that life in the city offered to them, to the young people, I mean. Art then became the way in which these young people faced reality and proposed values different from those of the violence that was imposed on them by society. The punk served as a kind of catharsis precisely because the characteristics that I have already described, that it did not need many instruments because the young people of Medellin had no resources to tame them, that it didn't require musical virtuosity because none of them had the possibility of musical training, and finally that the lyrics of punk will represent the anger accumulated by the lack of opportunity that the young people of Medellin have. Punk musicians were very clever. They knew what was the situation they were in, which is why they define themselves as, this is a quote, a legitimately bastard race, children of hatred, the intolerance of a third world, and of a country broken to the marrow. Fatherless children, peasant migrants, and workers in forced unemployment, inhabitants of the slopes of the city. Again, that is why they describe themselves as the generation with no future. The awareness of their situation led to the development of an entire aesthetic around punk. They dressed in worn black clothes, worker boots, and messy hairs. The name of the musical bands also expressed despair. For example, Pestes, pest, Anarquía, anarchy, Denuncia pública, public denunciation, Bajo tierra, underground, Desadaptados, Mesfest, Antioquia podrida, rotten Antioquia, Hartos de ti, Feed up with you, y Fértil Miseria, Fertile Misery. Let's summarize. Punk in Medellin served for the youth of the city to build a resistant movement against the adversities of the political and economical situation in Colombia in the 70s. Expressing violence through music, they managed to turn their situation around and feel in community thanks to the hundreds of young people who attend the concerts. And that is all. Thank you, Mr. Kevin, for your attention, and I hope you have enjoyed this story about politics, music, and violence.